Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Timeless Movie Podcast, episode number 93. My name is Victor Vasquez. Appreciate you joining me on another discussion, another breakdown of a new film that we got to check out in theaters or streaming. And then after we watch it, we discuss, we break down pros and cons, and we decide whether it is timeless. Would I consider rewatching this film multiple times in the future and add it to my collection? Before we talk about this week's episode, though, I did want to put up a link for last week's episode, episode number 92, where I talked about Smile 2. It is Halloween this week. Spooky season has been going on for the most of the month of October. So I thought, you know what? Feel free, guys. Check out episode number 92 and let me know what you thought about the review and discussion of Smile 2. Did you enjoy the film? Did you like it better than the first one? Go ahead and put it down below in the Smile 2 video. That way we can interact in the comments. All right, well, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into this week's episode in which we are covering Venom: The Last Dance. This is the last film in the Venom trilogy starring Tom Hardy. This film is actually directed by Kelly Marcel. And just as a little bit of background for folks that are listening for the first time, I'd like to kind of dive into some of my thoughts before I ended up watching the movie, just to kind of give you a little bit of my expectations going into watching a new movie. Now, I wasn't covering movies on this channel when the first Venom came out. I believe that one came out in 2018, but I did have an episode dedicated to Venom Let There Be Carnage on this channel. So I'll go ahead and put up a link for that one up above as well. But just to give you an overall thoughts, if you have not listened to this channel before, I have not really been a big fan of these Venom movies, to be quite honest with you. They are very hit and miss for me, mostly miss. I know that there is an audience that really loves and enjoys these movies. I have not been that audience for the last two films. These films have been very awkward for me. They are not funny various times throughout the movie of watching both of them. I just haven't had a good time. I never walk out of movies, and I haven't done that too often. These films have not been terrible and atrocious where it's made me want to walk out, but they've also been films where like I see it once and I completely forget about it a day or two later, just because they have not had a lasting impact on me and they are not timeless and things that I would rewatch. So hopefully that kind of gives you a little bit of context in regards to Venom and Venom Let There Be Carnage. They're films that, again, there's maybe bits and pieces that I may have enjoyed, but things that they just did not hit with me. There's nothing groundbreaking or monumental where I'm like, holy crap, I got to check this movie out again. I just have never felt like that watching these movies. And so I know that you're maybe thinking, well, Victor, if you did not enjoy the first film or the second film, why the heck are you watching the third film? Well, I'm a sucker for trilogies in that I enjoy watching the final installment of a trilogy. I like seeing stories end. So I'm already invested, right? I've already seen the first two films. Might not check out the last one, see how it can wrap up. Can it end on a high note as compared to the other two films that I just didn't really enjoy? Also, in the back of my mind, even though I know it's not possible, is there a chance that Spider-Man comes out? These films are in the Spider-Man universe. Venom is a prime character in the Spider-Man world. Could you see Tom Holland coming out in this film? I know that the chances are basically zero, but there's always hope. Never say never. So that's kind of one of the things that I'm always thinking about when I watch these movies. All right, those are just my initial thoughts before checking out Venom: The Last Dance. Let's go ahead and dive into some non-spoiler overall thoughts. That way you guys can kind of get an idea of what I liked or didn't like about the movie without kind of diving into pros and cons just yet. So I went to go ahead and check this one out. Fun story. I actually checked this out in Dallas. I was in Dallas over the weekend doing some stuff for work and went to go check it out in an AMC Dolby Cinema in Dallas. Really fun time. And I gotta say that I thought that Venom: The Last Dance was an okay to a good movie. I'm actually really surprised that I'm saying that it's a good movie, considering a couple minutes ago I just said that I did not enjoy the first two. But I think what helped me justify why I enjoyed or had an okay time is the fact that after watching the first two, I think going in, these films aren't trying to be something amazing. They're not trying to be something spectacular. They're trying to be is just entertaining. And for the hour and 50 minutes that I was there watching Venom: The Last Dance, I was entertained here and there for most of the movie. It was okay time to a good time, just depending on what scenes I enjoyed more. Just to kind of call it out, what I really enjoyed about the movie is this probably has the best interactive moments of the entire trilogy between Eddie Brock and Venom. They have some just hilarious banter back and forth. You know, you have Eddie just kind of trying to be the logical person, and then you have Venom, who is just a outlandish, ridiculous character saying ridiculous things about the world that Eddie lives in. And so they had a lot of funny moments. And to me, like I mentioned before, this has some of the best banter out of the entire trilogy, which also leads into some funny moments that I was actually laughing out loud for whenever they were both on screen. So I really enjoyed that. Also, got to call out the runtime for Venom The Last Dance. I think it worked in its favor. It only lasted an hour and 50 minutes, but it ran at a very quick pace where it didn't feel like it was dragging too much. Now, there are things that I felt were could have been cut and could have been removed. We'll talk about that in the cons, but overall, I think it ran at a really good pace overall that made my experience at least a lot more enjoyable, where I wasn't dreading like, okay, let's move on from this scene or let's move on from this character. It just doesn't make sense. I didn't feel that too much within the film. And then last but not least, I really enjoyed the way that the team that created the movie was able to kind of weave in this new antagonist, which is called Null. Null is like the creator of the symbiotes, but how they were able to kind of weave in his story at the beginning and throughout was really cool. I wish I could have gotten more of him. We'll dive into that in the cons section, but overall, just the idea of Null and what his part was to play in the film, I really dug that. Now, speaking of the story overall, I'll give you a quick synopsis about Venom the Last Dance. That way, you have a good sense as to what took place within the film. Again, not going to spoil too much about it, but the film revolves around Eddie and Venom after the events of No Way Home. So, if you don't remember, at the end of No Way Home, you have Eddie being brought into the MCU timeline or universe, and eventually he gets sucked back into the Sony universe. Well, it picks up right from there, and they end up making the decision that they're going to go to New York. And you're thinking, oh man, they're going to go to New York to finally face off against Spider Man. Well, it gets revealed that no, they are actually fugitives because they are considered murderers of killing a specific police officer. And so they decide to go to New York for some reason because maybe they can escape because there's so many people there. That wasn't really explained well, but they end up deciding that they're going to go to New York. And so they go from Mexico, where they are in, try to travel all the way to New York. They don't make it far because they end up getting attacked and followed by a xenophage. Now, the xenophage is this crazy looking beast that basically is hunting down Eddie and Venom. And this xenophage is actually sent by Null. And Null is the kind of the creator of the symbiotes as well as these xenophages. And now the reason that Null is sending out these xenophages as his minions is because of the fact that currently Null is trapped in a prison on Clintar. And he is basically trapped there. The symbiotes who Null created actually revolted against him and they trapped him in this prison. And the only way that Null can get out is if he obtains a codex. A codex ends up occurring after a symbiote connects with their host after they die. And they almost kind of save the host and they become one. And so he notices that Eddie and Venom are now one because in one of the prior movies, Venom ends up saving Eddie. And so now they have a codex attached to them. And so he sends out these xenophages to collect that codex because the codex is what's going to help him get out of prison. And so that's basically the whole motivation for Null to send out these xenophages. And throughout the movie, all Eddie and Venom are doing are running around trying to escape and keep away from these xenophages from capturing them and the codex that's within Venom. However, they can't run forever because they eventually have to make a decision. Either they give up the codex or they let the entire universe be succumbed to the destruction of Null. And so you see them make a very tough choice in order to hopefully try to save the universe in any way that they can as a lethal protector. That's really the essence of the entire movie. You're just seeing really the buddy cop action of Eddie and Venom trying to find ways so that they don't have to kind of give up the codex, but they eventually have to make that tough decision. And they're also fighting the xenophages at every twist and turn, the xenophage just is able to kind of track them down within the film. Once again, overall, it was a good time in the theater watching it. Nothing mind blowing, nothing spectacular. This is not a perfect movie in any sense. But again, going in, I just knew that these movies were not meant to be perfect movies. These were just meant to have a entertaining time. And I had an entertaining time at certain parts of this movie. My recommendation would be that you can skip this one. You do not have to watch this in theaters. If you're a really big fan of Venom and you've really enjoyed the first two, I would say to check this out on streaming. That's probably the biggest recommendation I can give it. But if you're not a fan of Marvel characters, if you're not a fan of the prior Venoms, this is definitely a skip. You don't have to check this movie out. But let's go ahead and let's dive into some spoiler thoughts about Venom The Last Dance. That way you guys can get a better sense as to why I enjoyed some of the elements. So, hopefully that gave you enough time. Let's go ahead and jump into some pros for Venom The Last Dance. First pro that I can give it is I really enjoyed the visuals that the film was able to portray. And really, when I say visuals, I'm talking about the way that they were able to kind of visualize Venom whenever he's next to Eddie. There was a lot of times when Venom would just appear, just as his head talking to Eddie, and it looked so clean, so crisp. I am not a visual effects artist, so again, take my thoughts with a grain of salt, but I thought it was really cool how they were able to kind of have Venom looking at Eddie, and it just looked very cool that it didn't look off. It didn't look like, yeah, Venom just doesn't look like he's there. No, the entire time they were having a back and forth and a discussion, it looked pretty realistic, and I really enjoyed that. And so anytime Eddie would talk to Venom, his symbiote, and whenever he would appear, it just looked like they articulated every single symbiote, and every time Venom is talking, all the symbiote and the black goo around him would move and it would have it kind of like a life of its own. Really enjoyed that. Speaking of symbiotes, they actually introduced a lot more symbiotes in this movie. You had symbiotes that were green, purple, brown. Up until this point, you had only seen two. You'd only seen Venom and you'd seen Carnage, which came out in the second Venom movie. Well, here, they just did a great effort to introduce different symbiotes and they colored them and they were able to kind of differentiate them as much as possible. And so I really appreciated that. It added a little bit more to the lore of the symbiotes, knowing that it's not just Venom that exists. There's different types of symbiotes. Some had different tentacles, some had weapons as hands. So really cool stuff. And I appreciated that they added more to the symbiotes and how they try to differentiate them and make them look very different from Venom. But I gotta say, from a visual perspective, and why this is my biggest pro, is how they visualize the design of Null. Null just looks so eerie, so sinister, so scary. And what I loved most is that he was always in this dark prison being held by some type of symbiote type of attachment to him. And every time they showed him, you would never see his face. He had long white hair, it would always be covering him, but he had this very dark and deep voice. And what I found out afterwards was that Null was actually voiced by Andy Serkis, the great actor from the Lord of the Rings films. And so I really enjoyed how they were able to kind of visualize Null. He was, again, always in this dark type of a prison or tomb. And then eventually, in the post-credit scene, they finally show his face, and it just looks super freaky and scary. And I just want more of it. After I saw it, I was like, yes, this is what I want. And this is kind of what I wish a lot more of the other Venom films had, which is more of this kind of sinister and scary look to these symbiote characters. And they nailed it with Null, at least for me. So really cool stuff when it came to the design of Null. Also got to call out the Xenophage looked like this very freaky alien monster. But what I loved most was that whenever the xenophage would eat something, or it would eat like a character, or eat a symbiote, after it ate the character on its back, you would just see the blood squirt out. So it's almost like the xenophage could only accept maybe like bones or whatever it needed for its digestive system. Everything else would just get splattered out of its back in blood. It just looked very horrifying, but it just added so much more to the experience of watching it in theaters. Second pro for me, I kind of teased it a little bit in my overall thoughts, but the chemistry between Eddie and Venom, it just works. Their banter was some of the best of the trilogy. And I think what works so well is because Eddie is playing the logical person. He's playing like the straight man. And so he is always thinking of like, hey, we can't do this, we can't do that. And then you have Venom, who is just a ridiculous character. He is experiencing the world through Eddie's eyes, and he knows songs that, that are played within the universe. He's telling Eddie to live a better life, to just do whatever he wants. They're in Vegas at a certain point. He starts falling in love with playing slots and feeling the adrenaline and the rush. And so, because they're both very different and they're opposite ends of the spectrum, it works so well because they complement each other. And it works even better when they actually, they disagree a lot, but when they do agree on something, they become the whole that they're meant to be. They become Venom and they become the lethal protector that the world needs, at least in this world that they have portrayed him in. So, really cool stuff. I enjoyed the banter, the dialogue between Eddie and Venom, and it really led to a lot of cool and emotional moments. Surprisingly, this had a lot of cool emotional beats within the film, but it also led to a lot of funny moments, which helped me enjoy it when there was a couple of scenes that I didn't really like. Speaking of scenes that I did not really like, let's go into cons about Venom: The Last Dance. There was a lot of dialogue that just was not good in several scenes. And just take this again with a grain of salt. I am not a writer. I don't know how to write dialogue. I don't know how to develop great dialogue and discussion between characters. But when you can tell that there's certain dialogue where you just don't believe what the characters are saying, that is a big problem. And I felt that a lot in Venom: The Last Dance. There was various times where characters would just say something and there was no intent, no heart in what they were saying. That's not a knock on the actor too. It wasn't how they were delivering it. It's just that what their line was, it just had no value and it just made certain scenes feel very awkward, and it just did not work in various different scenes. You had characters asking each other about certain elements of what was going on. It happened a lot in this space around Area 51. So Area 51 is actually a place that they highlight in Venom: The Last Dance, and there was just so many awkward interactions where there are lines that you actually would think about in your head, but instead the characters are splurting those lines out. And so it just did not work. So I feel like the dialogue in this film, whenever it wasn't Eddie and Venom, whenever it was any other character, just the dialogue was just not good, not on point, and it kind of made the experience a little bit just not enjoyable for me. Second con I gotta give out is that there was too many unnecessary scenes. There was scenes where you had characters like you had Strickland, who is this general in the army for Area 51, and Strickland is actually played by Chiwetel Ejiofor, and he had some really cool lines. He didn't have dialogue that was out of place, but then you had some of his sergeants just say lines, and then they would go into a different scene where you would see one of his sergeants just close the door. And I'm like, why are you showing him close the door? Or you see different types of individuals in Area 51 where you see somebody sit down in their desk and they change shoes. And it doesn't lead to anything. I'm like, why are we seeing characters change shoes? Like, it doesn't make any sense. Like, why are we witnessing this on the screen? So a lot of different stuff that I feel like could have been cut because it just didn't add any value to the film overall. It didn't lead to anything. And when I feel like a film has scenes that don't lead to anything, let's just cut that. And it would have made the film maybe feel more cohesive. What I would have loved to be replaced instead of those unnecessary scenes is more of Null. I wish there was more Null. So you could maybe make this as like another con of mine, but I feel like they introduced Null right at the beginning. They explain who he is, and then they kind of weave his story a little bit throughout the film, but he's not the true antagonist. The true antagonist is the xenophage. And so I really wish they could have highlighted more of Null, but I kind of understand why they didn't. And it's because this is the end of the trilogy. They should have what they really should have done is they should have included Null right from the beginning. That would have just made this pay off so much more because then you would have felt like, oh man, he is somebody that is very antagonizing. Null is somebody that we have to worry about. So again, I didn't really like that they only introduced Null in this third film. it seems like they might be setting him up for other Sony Universe films, or maybe in a way they might bring him into the Spider-Man films for the MCU. But I really wish that they could have cut all these unnecessary scenes and added more Null. That would have made my experience for the film a lot more of an enjoyable experience. Instead, you get bad dialogue and unnecessary scenes that are just not valuable to the audience member and doesn't add anything at the end of your experience after you watch it. So, those are some of my cons. It sucks that we had some of those elements to it. So, let's go ahead and kind of loop back to some positives. I want to talk about my favorite performance of the movie. Super easy, super simple. Tom Hardy is the best performance in Venom the Last Dance. He was basically my favorite performance in the last two films. It's just so cool seeing him play Eddie Brock, how awkward he kind of is in different types of social situations. Tom Hardy also voices the Venom character. And so it's so funny to think about it from a meta perspective that Tom Hardy is really just playing two characters in this film. He's playing Venom and he's also playing Eddie Brock, and how he's able to kind of have the banter between those two. It's believable. I believe that Tom Hardy is actually this character of Eddie Brock. I believe that he is this crazy, wild character of the symbiote that is Venom. So his performance throughout these movies is what's actually kept me from being completely bored. He's what's kept me engaged in watching these movies throughout the times that they've come out. My favorite scene of Venom the Last Dance was actually the ending, the end between Eddie and Venom, where they actually have to make a tough choice. And once again, spoiler warning for anybody that has not seen the film, but at the end, Eddie and Venom have to decide to sacrifice themselves. And instead, what Venom does is that he wants Eddie to live a life, live a full life without him being a host. And so he actually ends up saving Eddie, and Venom ends up sacrificing himself by capturing and sucking in all the xenophages into his body. And then he ends up going under a little acid shower. All the acid goes on Venom. It ends up killing the Venom symbiote as well as the xenophages. It was an emotional moment, man. I really enjoyed how they were able to play that out, because you could see that Eddie did not want to let Venom go. So, really fun stuff. That was my favorite scene. And then for a favorite shot, I'm basically going to say anything that includes Null. Whether it's his face reveal in the post-credit scene, whether it's him just kind of being introduced at the beginning of the film, all of the imagery, all of the shots that they were able to include for Null, those on their own just look so epic, and they look like movie posters that I would include on my wall. So anything that includes Null is probably going to make it as my favorite shot in this movie. All right, those are my thoughts, spoiler, non spoiler, about Venom the Last Dance. Now we have gotten to the last segment where we can talk about whether I consider Venom the Last Dance timeless. All right, you guys have heard my pros, you've heard my cons. This will hopefully be very easy for you guys to determine, but Venom the Last Dance is not a timeless movie for me. Now, the banter between Eddie and Venom is really fun. It's really cool. But just like the first two films, there's just not a lot of things that stick with you. Really, I think that the only thing that can stick with me is Null. What can they do with this Null character after this Venom trilogy? Are they going to include him in the Spider Man franchise? Are they going to include him in other franchises? What is that going to look like? Everything else, it's just not good dialogue, not enough scenes that really matter to me. It's just not enough characters, I guess, that I really cared for, other than Eddie, Brock, and Venom. Again, that was a very similar theme that I had in the first two films watching it, and really the entire trilogy as a whole. There's just not a lot for me to kind of remember and attach myself to, which is unfortunate. I always go into a movie hoping that I can kind of get attached to something and be like, yeah, I really enjoyed this character. Yeah, I really enjoyed the arc that they went through. But in this film, they had an emotional end between Eddie and Venom. But once again, this isn't a film that I would want to rewatch over and over again. And you could probably hear that in really some of the recommendations that I even gave off for this film. I said it was a skip. You could wait for this on streaming. You don't have to watch it in theaters, just because I don't think it gives the value that the audience is looking for. But that is just my opinion, guys. That is what I think about Venom The Last Dance. It is not a timeless movie, in my opinion. But what do you think? Do you enjoy the Venom movies? Is this your favorite Venom of all three that have come out? Let me know down below in the comments. I really want to hear you guys' thoughts about Venom: The Last Dance. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for those that stayed all the way through to listen to my Venom: The Last Dance thoughts. My name is Victor Vasquez. This has been episode number 93 of the Timeless Movie Podcast. Make sure to check out next week's episode as we cover a new film and we decide whether it is timeless after one viewing. All right, guys. Have a great rest of your week. Happy Halloween, and I'll talk to you guys later.